Hi class. So for today we are going to discuss about communication, particularly its nature, function, obstacles, along with its principles, levels, and its elements. Let's go first with the nature of communication. It says here, human beings need to communicate thoughts and feelings to others. The messages may be expressed, transmitted, and received through any of the perception channels, such as visual or sight, auditory or hearing, olfactory or smell, gustatory or taste, and tactile or touch. So in everyday life that we have, we always spend our waking hours talking to other people, conversing, making meaning, expressing our thoughts and feelings, and the like. And that is why some authors postulated definition that will identify the communication processes. But technically, communication comes from the Latin term communis, which means to share and inform ideas and feelings. So when we are communicating, we do not only listen. We express our thoughts for us to be able to inform people and let them understand what we are saying. And in turn, for listeners, we try to decode the message being sent by our speakers. And for some authors, let's go first with Ang of 2004. He posits that communication is the transmission of messages via verbal and nonverbal clues. So when we say verbal, this is through speaking, and nonverbal clues we have through writing, sign languages, and symbols as well, and the like. And for Wood of 2004, he also defines communication as a dynamic, meaning it's changing, systematic, contextual, or it's based on a particular situation, a proactive process rather, in which communicators construct personal meanings through their symbolic interaction. And from Como of 1996, he asserts that communication is a transaction in which the participants are mutually engaged in the process of creating meaning. So, in communication, it's not only about yourself, you also consider other people, especially if we are trying to inform them, convincing them to understand what we are saying. And in conveying what we mean through communication, we express our feelings, we tend to have some barriers, especially the noises that will come around when we are communicating. And we cannot avoid that interference in communication because of the background that we have, the environment that we use to communicate ourselves with. And from Myers of 1992, he maintains that communication is at the core of our humanness and that it is a transactional process. So when we say at the core of our humanness, communication is innate to us. Like even when we were born, we learned to communicate through crying, through some movements that will tell our listeners or our parents or our friends that we are hungry, that we want something, and so on. And that it is a transactional process because it's not every day that we talk to just one person only, di ba? We communicate with different types of people. May it be your friends, your teachers, your professors, your principal, your acquaintances, your parents, and even strangers. So that's how communication is. So we also have the functions of communication. So why do we use communication or what's the reason behind communicating? Number one is for interaction. Of course, it's every day that we always interact, not unless we don't want to be recognized by some people. So when you wake up in the morning, you talk to your siblings, to your parents, right? Just a simple conversation. That is an example of interaction. What else in conversing with your friends as well when you're at school, at any place? Okay. And second, we have for increasing our store of information. So in your school, whenever you are asked to participate in the class or to make a recitation, you learn some information, right? It adds knowledge in your mind and it keeps you going. So every time you receive information, you try to decode it, and at the same time, you have a storage of information where these information are being placed or stored. And aside from those, we also have for better understanding of ourselves and the world in which we live. So in communicating, we are not only targeting about ourselves, the way we understand meanings, but also the place, the environment, or the society that we live in. And lastly, we have for changing people's attitude. This is when you are trying to convince someone that something you believe in is true or otherwise. All right, so that's for the functions of communication. Next, we have the obstacles to effective communication. When we say obstacles, these are the barriers, the interference, or the things that hinder us from communicating effectively. The first one we have self image. So, this includes negative self esteem, indifferent behavior, poor social skills, and negative thoughts over how people view us. Since we are aiming for the English language, we always tend to feel inferior every time we speak with people who seem to have a broader knowledge of the English language, and that since it's not our native language, we tend to be inferior, okay, in speaking, and it usually lowers our self confidence or self esteem and speaking. So those things actually might affect our communication skills. So it's better for us to build our self confidence so that when we try to communicate with other people, we are confident and we try to convey our messages clearly and concisely. So next we have perception toward others. So our perception of others can create obstacles such as insulting people, stereotyping, or by just ignoring them. So through our perception towards others, for example, when we see people as someone to be belonging at a lower class, we tend to, have a shift or code switch on how we are going to interact with them. Sometimes we even avoid them, and that's not actually appropriate, all right, because we cannot choose who we are going to communicate with because once someone approach us and ask something or try to make a conversation with us, we have to consider our status, okay, our rank in the society. And just because someone is or someone tends to be looking poor or that something might be a stranger to you does not mean that you have to ignore them. So that might affect your effective communication. Kasi when you are affected by the way how you see people, there will be a barrier that will hinder you from communicating and trying to convey what you want them to understand. And also for the noise, this is the common ones, especially when you are in a crowded places or in the area where there are a lot of people. We have three noises. We have the internal and external, which is the common ones, and we also have the semantic noise. Let's go first with the internal noise. These are the thoughts and feelings that interfere with meaning. So when we say internal, that is the noise that is coming within us. Sometimes for example, in a physical class, you tend to not listen to your professor when there is something going into your mind. And instead of understanding what they are trying to say, you tend to be having this barrier where you don't have any focus on what the speaker is trying to tell. So, to avoid this kind of noises in your mind, make sure that you free your mind from anything that will hinder you from understanding what the speaker is telling you. Okay? So try to focus. Also, we have external noise, which is the sensory stimuli which draw people away from intended meaning. So external noises, for example, the cars that are roaming around your place, some people, okay, anything that will create noise outside yourself or beside you, your electric fan, okay, the cuckoos of the chicken, and the crying of your siblings or your nieces or nephews and so on. Those will fall under external noise. Also, we have semantic noise. So, what is this semantic noise? These are the alternate meanings aroused by certain symbols that inhibit the meaning. So, in semantic noise, for example, there is a speaker and the listener, and these two people might have different interpretation about a single word. So, for example, a Pangasinan person who went to Visayas. So, if you are familiar with the word mangingiyot, so the mangingiyot word in Visayas means a photographer. And for someone belonging in Ilocano tribe or race, mangingiyot might create a negative meaning because, its root word have, negative interpretation from us because when we say mangingiyot, so it's different, right? It might be different from your interpretation because you might interpret it as something that is vulgar, something that is bad, something that is inappropriate. But for Visayan people, for them, it's a photographer. So that's an example of semantic noise. There might be different interpretation about a word or group of words, okay, when they are communicating. So those are the things that might hinder us from communicating effectively to other people. And next, let's have the basic principles of communication. And so we have the maxim of quality, maxim of quantity, maxim of relevance, and maxim of manner. So let's go first with the maxim of quality, which says what you say must be true. So in maxim of quality, you should not lie and do not make unsupported claims. Okay, and everything that you must say must be factual. And according to maxim of quantity, what you say must be informative. So you don't have to say anything that is more informative than ask. So what you're going to do is to say neither more nor less than the discourse or the conversation requires. And on the other side, we have maxim of relevance, which says what you say must be relevant to what is being discussed or what needs to be discussed. So in here, you have to be relevant. So when you are talking about a specific topic, make sure that what you're going to say is related or connected to that topic. And lastly, we have the maxim of manner, which says what you say must be organized and clear. So in maxim of manner, you have to be brief and orderly, and you have to avoid ambiguity and obscurity. When we say ambiguity, you have to avoid repetition, and obscurity, you have to remove or omit words that are unnecessary or unknown to the speaker. So, in order to understand these things, let's have an activity and let's try to answer this all together. So, let's try to identify which maxim here is violated. So, on the first example, we have I'm a multi-millionaire, but actually I'm penniless. So what do you think is the maxim violated in here? So as we can see on the example, the speaker here lied. Okay, so what is the maxim violated? It's Which one? Is it the maxim of quality, quantity, manner, or relevance? So the correct answer for this first example, or the maxim violated in here, is the maxim of quality because the speaker has failed to tell the truth. And what is the truth in here? That he is penniless. So it's the other way around. Okay, what he is trying is the complete opposite of what he is trying to say. So he violated the maxim of quality, which says that you have to not make unsupported claims and you should not lie. I hope you got that right. Next, we have a conversation in here. So the first speaker says, "When am I going to get back the money I lent you?" So the other replied, "Boy, it's hot in here." So what do you think is the maxim violated in here? Is the response connected with the first statement being said? So what do you think is the maxim violated in here? So the correct answer, or the maxim violated in here, is the maxim of relevance because B's answer is not related to A's question. And in the maxim of relevance, of course, you have to be relevant in delivering your information and make sure that it's connected or relevant to the topic. Okay? And lastly, we have, "What should I do to get rid of this headache?" So this is supposed to be B. So B answered, "Take some medicine." So what do you think is the maxim violated in here? And so the correct answer is, or the maxim violated in here is the maxim of quantity. Why? Because B has not provided enough information. So actually, the first speaker would like to know the steps or the things that he should do to get rid of the headache. But instead, the listener or the second speaker said that take some medicine. So it's not actually worth of quantity. It lacks some information, and that in maximum of quantity, make sure that you are being informative. Okay, so I hope you got all of these answers correctly. Let's move on to the elements of communication. So in the elements of communication, we have the five ones or the basic ones. We have the sender, the message, the channel, the receiver, and the feedback. So let's go first with the sender. When we say sender, it is the transmitter of verbal and non-verbal messages. Or this is also the person who encodes the message being sent. Or you are the speaker yourself. You are the sender of the message if you convey your message from yourself to another person. So I think we are already clear with that. And also the message, it's the content which is organized and encoded in language understood by the speakers and transmitted verbally or non-verbally through channels. So the message here is the information, the ideas, the feelings that we want the listeners to decode. Okay? And next we have the channel. So channel is different from the brand of Chanel, right? So what is the channel being talked to in the communication? So this is the medium used by the speakers in encoding and decoding messages. So in channel, this is where the message flows through. And without this one, messages will not be sent to our receiver or our listeners. And next we have the receiver or the decoder of the message sent by the speaker. And lastly, we have the feedback or the receiver's response to the message sent by the speaker. So in the communication process, everything that is in here is found in the process itself. So from the sender, since the sender is the creator of messages or ideas being sent to the receiver, along with its message that travels in the channel, okay, that is being received by the receiver or listener in the communication. And in turn, you have to create now a feedback that goes to the sender. So without feedback, you will never know whether the message sent by the sender is understood. So make sure that if you want a response from from the receiver rather, you have to see to it as a sender to send and convey your meaning clearly, okay, without barriers or interferences. All right. So that's for the elements of communication. Next, we have the levels of communication. So we have actually, how many do we have for levels of communication? We have 8. So let's go first with the first two. We have intrapersonal communication or communicating within you. So basically, in communication, it's not actually just talking about two other people. We also consider talking within ourselves. So we might actually find ourselves talking, okay, within ourselves. For example, when we are trying to make decisions, we try to communicate with ourselves, and that will fall under intrapersonal communication. Intra meaning there's only one. Okay, who is this one? That's you, yourself. Okay, and next we have interpersonal communication, which is the communication among small number of people. So in interpersonal communication, it's the opposite of interpersonal communication, because in interpersonal communication, it's not you yourself whom you are trying to make meaning with. It means that you are communicating not only to one person, but to two or more people. So that's for interpersonal communication, just a small number of people. Okay, 2 to 5 members or up to 7 people in a conversation or communication. So next we have the public communication, which is speaking with an audience. This is particular or specific with the situation when you are the speaker and that you are delivering a message before an audience. So one example for that, if you have tried this one already, is when delivering a speech, right? In delivering a speech, it's you who is the speaker trying to make meaning with your audience, and usually you don't expect feedback from them aside from the emotions, we from the applauses made by them if they are impressed by what you have said. So that's for public communication. And next we have mass communication or communication via mass media system. So what are our mass media? We have radio, televisions. We also have our tablets, our newspapers, right? So we create meaning through this media or medium, okay? And one example for that are the newspapers, brochures, magazines, and the like. Next, we also have communication technology, which is communication through the use of information technology. So in here, we make use of our gadgets, our cell phones, telephones in communication. So anything that will fall under technology, and we are trying to convey our messages through this gadgets or technology are considered to be under communication technology. Next, we have organizational communication, where communication within the workplace between and among the members in order to carry out an organization's objectives and purposes, as well as defining goal-directed behavior for efficiency and effectiveness. So in a school, there are the president for academic affairs, the teachers, and the utilities. So they make up an organization, and their goal is to provide meaningful learning to the students. And for your profession in the future. You might be deployed in a hospital or an institution, and then you will be part of this organization where you have to carry out objectives, and that is to promote healthy living, wellness to people. So that's for organizational communication. And we have the last two. We have intercultural communication, or the communication between and among cultural communities and nations to promote understanding. One example for this is when people from Baguio or Cordillera went to Pangasinan along with the Visayan people and people from Mindoro or from Mindanao regions. They try to gather in a place where they have to promote and make people understand what their tribe or culture is all about. Okay, that is usual before. I've also witnessed this kind of communication in Baguio when I was still living there and studying there. I've attended some of these gatherings where people from Cordillera gather and try to um, show how they dance, how their cultures are different from one another, and that they promote understanding as well in doing these practices and traditions. And lastly, we have the development communication, which is the communication between progressive nations and developing societies of the world in order to facilitate the total development of individuals and nations. So, one perfect example for this one is the ASEAN, where the Southeast Asian nations gather in a particular country to discuss about their visions, their missions, their um, goals, and target objectives in achieving their unity to their nations. And it also promotes understanding and oneness of the nation in which they belong or to where they actually belong. So let's go or move to the aspects of communication. We actually have two, the verbal or linguistic aspect, and we have the non-verbal aspect. So let's go first with the verbal or linguistic aspect. So this is the aspect that makes use of words, may it be through oral, written, formal, or informal. So in verbal or linguistic aspect, we do not only consider the way we speak or through orally, we also consider communicating in a written format. And we try to be formal or informal. So, speaking of formality in communicating, we may also touch about language registers. So, we have five: frozen, formal, consultative, casual, and intimate. Let's try to break this ones. Let's go first with frozen. When we say frozen, these are communication or language that are stagnant or not actually being changed. And one perfect example for this one is the Bible. Also, we may consider the Ten Commandments, and then we also have our hymns in the schools, right? So those are examples of our frozen registers. So what about formal registers? So from the word itself, formal, we use this register when we are in a situation where we have to show respect and show our ranking in the society. So, for example, in the school, when you are trying to communicate or converse with the principal or the president of the school, so it's actually different when we are trying to converse with our friends. So, we have to be formal, and it's usually used. This formal register is used in schools or even in institutions, okay, that has professionals, okay, and that you have to modify the way you talk and you have to be formal as well. in speaking. And how do we show formality in communication? With the use of greetings such as good morning instead of just saying morning, right? And also with addressing people by their names such as sir, ma'am, and the like. So those are under formal registers. Next, we have consultative. So in consultative, one perfect example for this one is when we are going to a hospital, okay, and we are trying to consult a doctor, we try to communicate with these professionals, okay, about our health and so on. So for casual naman, for casual registers, this is a register or language that is used by our friends. So how do we talk to our friends? So it's informal, right? In a sense that we might try to insult them rather in a way that might not offend them as compared to, making jokes with some people that are not really that close to you. So you see the relatedness or connectedness of your relationships toward another affects the way you communicate. So casual is the language used by the friends. And lastly, we have the intimate. From the word intimate, it falls under the language used by your lovers or even your family. Aside from your lovers, we might also consider your best friend or even your family or the members in your family. Okay, so that's for the verbal or linguistic aspect. Let's go to the aspects of non-verbal communication. So this aspect does not make use of words but may enhance or change the linguistic code. So it has these elements, the non-linguistic elements and the paralinguistic elements or metalinguistic elements. So first one, we have the kinesics or the language of the body. So our body movements. Next, we have proxemics or the language of space. Okay, how far or close we are. And then chronemics, which is the language of time. Haptics, which is the language of touch. Okay, just to make sure that you memorize or be familiar with these ones. I'll give you a mnemonics. Okay, when we say haptics, haplos, so it's language of touch. I hope that one helps. Okay, so in olfactics, it's the language of smell. Artifactual, language of the objects. So artifacts from the word itself. And then we have the physical appearance or how someone looks. And then we have the paralinguistic element. And so we have the vocal quality or the quality of your voice, the way you deliver your message, the way you articulate your words or sentences. And then we have the pitch, the highness or lowness of the tone, the tempo or how fast or slow we talk. And then the volume, this is the loudness or softness or quietness of your speaking is. And then we have the juncture or the pause or how we differentiate a syllable from another syllable when we are talking. So, for example, the word syllable, still, syllable. So, we consider the first syllable still as the first syllable, of course, because of the pause being made. So, syllable, and then we move on to the word able, syllable. So, we have three syllables on that word. Syllables. So we were able to identify the three syllables in the word syllable because of the pause being made. So that's for the juncture. Okay, I hope that we are already familiar with these ones. And then now we move on to the nonverbal communication. Specifically, it's function. So we have the repeating, contradicting, substituting, complementing, accenting, relating, and regulating. So let's go first with repeating. So in repeating, with nonverbal signals, it's like complementing or accenting, but with a delay between the verbal and nonverbal communication. This acts as a form of emphasis or as in other forms of repetition. So, for example, saying no, then shaking head afterwards, asking for help, and then after a short delay during which they do not respond, you are raising eyebrows and saying, hmm? Okay, so that's for repeating. Let's go in contradicting. So, contradicting is sending a nonverbal message that disagrees with what is being said. So, this can be done deliberately in order to confuse. And it also may happen subconsciously when we are lying. Okay, for example, saying no while gently nodding. And then another one, saying I did not do it while rubbing the nose and pulling at the collar. So these are the signs that someone is lying. So next we have substituting. So in substituting, it's the replacement of words with nonverbal language. So there are times when nonverbal language is just better, right? It just paints a thousand words when we are using this nonverbal language. And so sometimes there are things that are best left unsaid, and that's true. Sometimes the raising of an eyebrows speaks volume. For example, shall we? And then we are waggling eyebrows and then grins. Or another example, stepping towards an aggressor into their private body space with a stern expression. So that might actually be interpreted as something that might be unusual to the person you are conversing with. So that's for substituting. Let's go to complementing. So complementing actually is similar to accenting, but it covers a wider range of the message. It ensures that all speech is paralleled by nonverbal communication that aligns with what is being said. So, for example, when talking about sad things, lowering the head and using a sad tone. 'Di ba? We actually do that most of the time. 'Di ba? When we are trying to share our feelings to our friends or our lovers or anyone that is close to our heart, we tend to lower our head and use a sad tone. 'Di ba? May paawa effect. And on the other hand, when we seek to excite, we actually we are actually being animated in body and voice. So when we are excited in what we are saying, we tend to do exaggerated movements, right? So that is to complement what we are saying. And next we have accenting. It is calling attention to a key part of the message. So when you put an accent onto it, you create actually an emphasis, making the item stand out by amplifying it. So for example, stamping, right? Increasing the volume, moving forward, or slowing down. Those are the examples of movements that are actually accenting what we are trying to say. And lastly, we have relating and regulating. So in regulating, this is where nonverbal language can be used to send signals about speaking, and it's a typical use around starting and ending speech, and it can also be used to regulate the speech of others, indicating that you want them to stop, so yeah, so that you can speak, or perhaps that you want them to respond. So for example, breaking or making eye contact with someone, or giving a final and firm nod. And another one, when you have finished speaking, right? And also, aside from those mentioned, we have raising eyebrows when you are about to start speaking. So we usually do this, especially when we are delivering a speech. If you have tried that one before, right? We tend to make these movements, nonverbal movements, to emphasize or highlight what we are trying to say. Okay, so that's for nonverbal communication under functions. Now we move on to the types of nonverbal communication. So we have first the time-related nonverbal of a form of interpersonal communication, meaning it speaks. That is why in history, the transition of events that happened from time to time speak volumes, right? So we tend to make a meaning, okay, by the time that has been spent before. And another example for this one is when you experience being heartbroken, right? You tend to move on as time passes by. And during that time, those times that you experience heartaches, right? It made you to be the person who you are ought to be, right? So those times created meaning for you, right? So that's for the time. And proxemics, this is the use of space when people communicate in relation with other people. So when we are communicating, actually, the space between our listeners and us may signify or exemplify meanings. So we have the three spaces here. We have the intimate, personal, and public space. So what does this mean? So in intimate space, we observe 1 to 1.5 feet. And actually, minsan wala namang space eh. And we actually observe this one when we are speaking with someone really close to us, right? And also for personal space, we have 1 to 2.5 feet. So if you don't want to be disturbed and you want to spend your time alone, you have to be 1 to 2.5 feet away from people. And so when you are trying to approach someone and they tend to might look like they're spending their time alone and personal space, right? You leave the person alone when they're trying to observe this space within them. So lastly, we have the public space or the 12 feet as far as visible in an auditorium or lecture hall. So as the word implies public, so you are quite far from the speaker or the other people because it's public. It might happen that the person you are listening to is a stranger to you, or the person beside you or in front of you is not related to you. So these spaces might actually create meaning in communication, right? So that's for proxemics. Next, we have territoriality. So this is the non-verbal associated with geographic location where people are in relation to one another. So for example, the lions, actually I've read about this one, lions tend to not allow other animals aside from lions to enter their place. So they might, create a fight to other animals if they try to invade their spaces. And in real life, specifically at school, when our principal or the president of the school have the authority or permission to enter our class, it's allowed. But if it's us students or something that is quite lower than their rank, we tend to ask permission first. So, do you observe the territoriality? Right? So if you are in the space of the president's office, make sure that you observe formality and that you are not acting like you're inside the classroom. But for them, when they try to enter our classroom, it's okay since they are the facilitator and the supervisor of the school or the institution where we are in. So next, we have the body movements and gestures. So these are body languages, including hand signals, which connote meaning. So this is where we can use or make use of the sign language, right? Or also the symbols in the streets, or the person making hand signals in the streets, or someone who is trying to be quiet and just tend to convey meaning through these gestures, right? So those are body movement and gestures. And I know you're already familiar with this one, right? When you were in high school, you tried to ace your exam by cheating. I don't know if you tried that one already. how naughty you were before. Actually, most of the students, if not all, might have experienced those things, right? You try to talk to your classmate or friend to tell you their answers about a specific question, especially during math subjects, right? So those are the instances where we learned to create body movements, right? So, for example, pag ang sagot A, you will raise one of your fingers. So, kapag B naman, you will raise two of your fingers. You know, I think you have tried all of those things. But anyway, moving on to posture. This is the position or bearing of the body. So, if you are a student, you tend to, sit daily and sometimes you don't observe proper sitting, proper balancing of your body, right? So actually, it might signal, okay, from the way you sit, the way you stand, the way you express yourself in other people, right? It connotes meaning. So if you are sitting and you are not observing a proper posture, it might indicate that at home you might be doing this all the time, right? So, since we are still young, I suggest that we always maintain a good posture, especially if we are in a formal institution or situations, right? Or more specifically, when you are deployed already in your career or professions. All right, so next we have facial expressions. So these are the changes in eyes, mouth, etc., which send communication messages to the speakers. So girls, right? We always do this. If you have your significant other with you, you tend to make facial expressions when you don't agree with what your partner is saying, and so you create facial expressions. So this might indicate the other way around or the complete opposite of what you're trying to say. So if your boyfriend or girlfriend asks you to something, okay ka lang ba? So something like that. And then you would say, oh naman. And then you will roll your eyes. So that will actually connotes that what you said is different from what you have expressed through your facial expressions. So be careful when doing this ones because sometimes what we said are actually not accompanied by our facial expressions. You say you are okay, but your face looks like you're not. So make sure that they jive together. All right. So next, we also have eye movement. So eye movement plays a significant role in sustaining the flow of interaction. So in communicating, you know that someone is interested talking with you if they are looking to you eye to eye. Because if not, it might signal that they don't want to talk to you, they're not interested, or they don't have the focus to talk to you. Or most of the time, if not all, it indicates that there is an awkward, you know, uh, situation that is happening between you, especially when you're talking to your crush, to someone that might cause you to feel awkward. Diba? We usually do that when we are in an awkward situation. We tend to either look at the person eye to eye or we tend to look at different directions. So it depends on the context that where we are in. And next, we have the artifacts or the objects or things in contact with the communicators rather that may serve as nonverbal stimuli. So from the word itself, artifacts, these are the objects that the speaker or a person might use in communicating or conversing. And next, we have silence. This is a technique used to send meanings either consciously or unconsciously. So others said that silence means yes. So why did we say that? Because sometimes when we try to ask question that requires yes or no answer, some people might just choose to be silent. And for other people, they might interpret that as something or as an answer of yes, right? So being silent actually might create meaning as well. You might not create facial expressions, eye movement, or verbal messages, but through silence, you know that something might be wrong, right? For example, you are talking to your friend who were seem to be happy, or your friends who seem to be happy yesterday, and then the next morning they tend to look sad, and you try to talk to them what happened, why do your faces look like that? So they tend to be silent, meaning there is something wrong going on between them, and that you have to unlock the meaning behind it. So actually it's very difficult to be the encoder of the message and also decoding the message sent by your listener. So we have to be very focused and very, uh, what do you call this one? And that we observe listening skills, diba? We have to be equipped with these skills so that we will observe an effective communication in the long run. So next we have the last two, the paralanguage. We have already discussed about these things, about the voice quality rather, the pitch, the tone, and the like. So this refers to how something is said and not what is said. So with the use of the paralinguistic elements such as the juncture, the pitch, the tone, diba, we are focusing on how people deliver or convey their message in the process. So it's not actually what they mean, but how they deliver the message. That's for paralanguage. And then lastly, we have tactile communication. When we say tactile, okay, sense of touch, right? So one of the first modes of communication of the human being is through touching. So for example, when we are handshaking, right? When we are patting on someone's shoulder, when we are kissing, okay, those are forms of tactile communication. So that's everything. Okay, that's the last slide. So I hope that you have gotten relevant information about these ideas and topics, and we'll see each other again next meeting. Goodbye, guys. Get ready for a quiz after this one. I'll be sending it in a while. So I'll see you in a bit.